Welcome back to the MyRadar Podcast. If you are watching here on YouTube, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And of course, remember to click on that notification bell as well. That way you always know whenever we drop a new video. You can also find these podcasts on SoundCloud if you'd like to listen to them on the go. SoundCloud.com/MyRadar. We continue on with our slew of excellent guests, and today, we are going to be talking about one of the more significant weather events from the last year. My guest today is a weather forecaster from WECT in Wilmington, North Carolina. Yet again, another fellow Ohio Bobcat, Gabe Ross. Gabe, how are you this morning?
Hey, buddy, I'm good. You know, people are going to start to get suspicious when you start having all these Bobcats on the show.
We're taking over. You know, I feel like I can be I can be non-biased I can be a non-biased person on camera for sure. But when it comes to bringing on the Bobcats, I'll always hold a little bit, just a little bit of bias.
There you go. Love to hear it.
So, Gabe, you know, your journey to becoming a on-air weather person was not exactly conventional, right? Take me through how exactly you ended up where you are today.
Wow. So I'd have to take you back 10 years ago to, wouldn't you know it, Ohio University, right? And I began a actual relationship with a meteorology student named Savannah. And, you know, she saw a weird creative presence in me that was like, you know, I think you'd be really good at doing weather. At the time, I was doing sketch comedy and a number of other things behind the scenes. And she's like, yeah, I really think you could do this. So I went and auditioned. I think we auditioned around the same time or got cleared at least to do on-air forecasting at the same time. And wouldn't you know it, on my 21st birthday, March 17th, 2009, I got my weather debut under my belt. So, you know, continued through college. Well, the relationship didn't last. That's okay. You know, not all of them do. I continued to follow this weather path, as well as following reporting and directing and just anything else that you can imagine. I kept going with it. I took a few classes, and at the end of the day, graduated with a degree in video production with a corollary in journalism and film. So no technical meteorology degree, which is obviously why I don't brand myself as a meteorologist, because it's the actual degree on paper. So I started for a year, you know, at a very small market station in Ohio. And, you know, when things didn't go super well, I actually went back to OU and found myself in the same WAUB newsroom that I started out in. But this time I was helping to teach the future broadcast journalism students, meteorology majors, sports, and otherwise. Did that for a few years. And then the OU connection, my good friend and former roommate, Will Tapper, who was the news operations manager down here at ECT, said, hey, there's a job opening. So at this point, mind you, I'm not really much in the weather forecasting game. I'm filling in from time to time, you know, for the college broadcast. But at this point, this signaled my shift over to the behind the scenes news management end of things. Then Hurricane Matthew happened in 2016. Boy, talk about an impressive storm to have to go through. Right. I believe it was I can't remember if it was a Category 1 or 2 when it skirted up the coast, but it was rapidly losing strength rolling up the Carolina coast here. Shortly after that, one of the meteorologists here by the name of Patrick Ellis, who's in Jackson, Mississippi now, decided he was going to leave and go back to Jackson. So our chief meteorologist, Gannon Medwick, approached me and said, hey, you know, I understand you've got, you know, a background doing weather. And I said, yeah, that's the case. Like, would you be interested in doing it again? I said, sure. You know, keep in mind, I don't have a degree. If that's an issue, someone tell me now, or if, you know, the station be willing to pay for me to go back to school and get that certification, right, that would be fine. Long and short, they decided, you know, as it was, my knowledge and everything was very well sufficed. My ability to communicate was good. And so since late 2016, I've now been back on the air weekend mornings and filling in for the chief, who works weekday mornings as well. So boy, talk about a ride.
I mean, but you represent exactly what the television industry, for people getting into it, need to look at it as. It is no longer something I am going to work in TV and I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do just this. That doesn't exist anymore. You really have to be able to do and understand multiple different roles in a newsroom. And weather is, in my opinion, when it comes to getting on that monitor, green screen, what have you, and you're looking back into that camera and there's no script, I mean, it's kind of a great way to kind of become accustomed to a lot of different situations.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Whether it's reporting, whether it's knowing how to do stuff on the technical end. In fact, after this interview, I'm going to be running cameras for our midday broadcast, just because we're a little short-staffed today. So there really is a wide understanding that has to happen, but you immerse yourself in the different areas of this industry, and you really will come away with not only a great knowledge but a great respect for others that may be doing the job a little more regularly.
So, did you have a light bulb moment? I've asked everybody this question. Did you have a light bulb moment where it just went off and you said, you know what? Weather is really something I want to dedicate a good portion of my life to. I mean, that's part of your job to talk about the weather. Did you have a moment that really just sparked that creative interest in you in weather?
Growing up, I was always scared of storms. I can remember tuning in to WBNS in Columbus, Ohio. Mike Davis, who at the time was the chief meteorologist, anytime that there was severe weather in the late 90s. And I was a kid. I was scared a tornado was going to suck me up and sweep me away. So I'd always had that fascination with weather in the back of my mind. And then fast forward to college, I get a few weathercasts under my belt, and I'm hearing such great feedback from my instructors, from other meteorology major students. And I'm thinking to myself, this could be something. I don't know the technicalities with the degree and everything that I'd have to go through, but this is certainly an option. And the feedback continually improved. We all have our rough broadcasts, obviously, but by and large, it was overall good. And so I thought that this would be a good career path to continue to follow. And then naturally, once you get older, you understand how weather systems work. That fear subsides, and that fear for me now turns to excitement. So anytime a big storm rolls in, anytime, especially here in the coastal Carolinas, that sea breeze boundary comes in, we get pop-up showers and storms. And now next thing you know, boom, severe thunderstorm warning, or 60-mile-an-hour wind gusts or small hail. Like that kind of stuff is incredible to me. So I would have to say that it came really in late college, and then that confidence continued to grow, especially when the chief here at WECT asked me to come back and get back into the weather game after so long.
And what a way to get back into it with what occurred last year. Of course, I'm talking about Hurricane Florence. At least the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration just recently put out their full report about it. The timing couldn't have been better for us to do this interview here. And just a couple of bullet points from that storm. A Category 4 hurricane making landfall at a Cat 1. I mean, I know that you know all of this, but just to reiterate this. 22 direct deaths, 30 indirect deaths, storm surge between 8 to 11 feet, 10 inches of rainfall, 44 tornadoes, and $24 billion in damage. I know that this is a deep one to unpack here, Gabe. But let's start with leading up to the storm and then get into during it and then the aftermath. Leading up to Florence working its way toward the Carolina coast, what was going on in the newsroom when you guys were trying to get a grip on what was coming your way and what potentially could occur?
Sure. Well, of course, we're always looking at the long-range models. For us, the GFS, the Euro, they're the most reliable. At least the Euro is certainly more statistically correct in our case. And so, we're I'd say a little less than a week out from landfall. And now the models are starting to come into some alignment. And for us, they're not looking good. They're very troubling looking. And, as we know, the models change. They change every 6 hours, or, every new update that comes out with a storm, things change, different circumstances change. Once we got started, I would say that Sunday, it became a little more real that, hey, there's a good potential that we could be smack in the middle of a devastating hurricane, especially if it continues on the trajectory it goes. So in the newsroom, all precautions are made. Our news managers are meeting with our corporate folks, at the time Raycom Media, and we're working to get additional equipment into place, some additional staffing into place as well. The email is going out, from management. Hey, we're going to be in the midst of the storm, so start making your preparations now. And really just a lot of communication on a regular basis from the meteorologists to the news staff in terms of, the kind of things we could expect.
When you say, when you heard your news director say, make your preparations, what are we talking about? Because when you say that to the general public, or when you're on the air telling people to make your preparations now, it's to have your emergency kit at home with, the waterproof casing with all of your important documents in there, pet food and all that. And when it comes down to it, be prepared to evacuate. It's a totally different ball game when it comes to making preparations in news, right? What did you guys have to do?
Well, you're exactly right. Our preparations include, hey, there's a good chance a lot of us are going to be sleeping at the station because we're going to be in wall-to-wall coverage. And we were for more than 80 hours during the course of Florence, from prior to landfall to several days out. So in our case, it was, hey, start packing your belongings. And we do that, every year before the start of the Atlantic hurricane season. We're in those preparations now of make your plan, put it into place, because it only takes one storm. Right. So everyone here, I think, had a good base plan in place, but now it's time to act on it. So those little tiny details that may not be completely formed with your hurricane plans are now starting to come in place. So our distinguished anchors, John Evans, I remember, he's one of our evening anchors. He called me one day and was just like, is this going to be as bad or as devastating as you guys are saying? And I said, John, yeah. He's like, okay, I need to send my wife and, the rest of my family elsewhere. Right. He's like, where's a good place to go? I said, well, really, we don't know yet, but just the farther inland you can be certainly is going to be the better option. So those preparations were in place.
You guys were, Wilmington is pretty darn close to where it made landfall. Of course, it had weakened significantly, but just with the amount of storm surge and the wind off the coast, it was already just devastating, as again, I'm sure you well know. Take me through now, when you're looking at that storm on radar. You see, for me, when I was forecasting weather in Pennsylvania, looking at it on radar, just thinking, this storm is humongous. And if it reaches the coastline at a Category 4, we're talking about just a monster nightmare storm. Of course, it had weakened to a Cat 1, but still pretty darn bad. Take me through when you saw it on radar and you saw it, the cone starting to update, coming essentially right for you guys.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, it made landfall near Wrightsville Beach, which is one of the area beaches here in Wilmington. So when you see, I forget the exact place they pinpointed it. I want to say it might have been Masonboro Inlet, but it was near Wrightsville Beach. That for us is that landmark. When we got to Monday and Tuesday, at this point, weather-wise, we're already kind of on our new shifts. But when I saw that actually on the radar, when we were able to kind of switch things over from our tropical satellite to the radar and just see the intensity of the rain and the speed in which the winds were whipping around, I'm thinking to myself, I wonder how 9-year-old Gabe would picture seeing something like this coming. And I know that I would have been absolutely terrified. But here I am now, at the time, 30-year-old Gabe, and I'm thinking to myself, this is certainly going to pack a punch. But just the fact that this kind of thing can form in nature is downright amazing.
It's the kind of the ultimate dichotomy with weather, right? Where on one side you have something like just looking at an image of a tornado or a hurricane from up above, from space. It's beautiful. It's hard to describe it other than it being just astounding, right? Like you said, the fact that this can actually occur and we can see it, whether or not it's a video or a picture or with our very own eyes. The fact that you can see it is crazy. On the flip side, boy, it's essentially a nightmare come to life for certain people that it affects directly. That's the worst day of their life, coming face to face with a literal force of nature. for you guys, seeing it coming toward the coastline, the eye of the storm, I mean, what did it feel like in the building? What did you see?
Oh yeah, you're gonna love this. So at this point, we're in wall-to-wall coverage. I believe it was. It's funny because those days just all seem to string together. I believe it made landfall on it's either a Thursday or a Friday. I feel like it may have been a Friday. One of our part-time meteorologists by the name of Colin Hackman was stationed out in Carolina Beach, which is a beach just south of Wrightsville where it made landfall. I can remember watching him get blown over by a wind gust that completely took out their live shot. We're using, those live view backpacks, and they took a tumble because of a wind gust, and so at that point, and Collins, he's a thin guy. His camera guy is very muscular and everything, but when it's enough to take two grown adult people off of their feet, like it's a very sobering experience. Shortly after, at Wilmington International, a wind gust rather of, I believe, 105 miles an hour was clocked there. Those winds were so strong that in the I should say, on top of the building, our air handler got ripped off the roof. Those winds were that strong, and when it ripped that air handler off, it tore open a huge hole in the roof. Now we've got water pouring into the station like crazy. And it was bad enough to where here we are, not 2 days into our coverage, our news director is now telling us, hey guys, we're going to have to evacuate the station. It is not safe for people to be sleeping here. So they moved us down the way to a rehab facility in town called Coastal Horizons. We had some issues there with the security alarm going off that wasn't going to work, and so they moved us then to Pine Valley United Methodist Church, which was right down the street. Man. So we had some to stay in, which was crazy. And this all is happening, by the way, for me during my off time. So myself, Gannon, Medwick, we're on this 2 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift. We're given the evacuation order like 6 o'clock at night. So we should be asleep and getting ready for the next day. And all of this is happening. The alarm's going off, and it's about 9 or 10. And we're thinking to ourselves, we're not going to get any sleep tonight. So we made a desperation move before they moved us to the church. And I actually got on the road and drove through Wilmington back to my apartment. It's a 3rd floor apartment, happens to be right next to a power substation. And sure enough, we get there. We didn't lose water, didn't lose electricity, internet, any of that. So that gave us a good place to kind of retreat to, at least a little bit. But then now you've got the rains, now you got the flooding that takes place. So it was very short-lived as the road to get into my apartment complex became flooded out.
It's essentially a disaster movie unfolding around you.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I can remember thinking to myself, like, if this were a real life horror movie, and for some, I think it was, because you've got the damage, you've got the lack of electricity, and gas stations closed, roads that were impassable or washed out due to the torrential rains.
Having that plan is of the utmost importance, because in those moments you're almost not thinking, you're just acting. And I can only imagine what it's like for somebody to go through that. And let's not forget, in Wilmington, North Carolina, a storm such as this, not exactly commonplace, at least to happen like this. I mean, once you get north of Florida, things tend to calm down a little bit. It's not impossible to see hurricanes at all, but as far as that intensity, making land as a Cat 1, but again as a Cat 4 off the coast, it will definitely be a storm that I think will for sure be talked about for many, many, many years to come.
You're absolutely right. And a few things to our advantage. Obviously, the winds sort of laxed up. Those outer wind bands began to unravel. So as it moved its way closer, less wind speed. But something we always preach, as far as our philosophy here in the First Alert Weather Center, is that it's not about the number or the rating that comes from the official source. So as much as we respect NOAA, the National Hurricane Center, a Cat 4 is just as bad as a Cat 1, because you're going to have the
Still a
impacts that are
hurricane.
all the exactly heavy rains, storm surge, you name it. The spin up tornadoes, that was another fun night. There's any multitude of things that can happen, and that's where I worry in the years to come when other storms work their way through. The rapid decrease in wind speed, I think, actually convinced some people to stay here and ride out the
Never a
storm.
good idea.
Never a good idea. And so hopefully in the future, in our meetings that we've had with the National Weather Service and the National Hurricane Center, we hope that in the future there will be, other ways to classify storms, not solely based off of wind speed. Hard to believe that this was the 9th most destructive storm in U.S. history. Yeah. That is still just mind-boggling reading over that report.
So once the flooding and everything subsides, because that was the number one killer when it came to how people died in this storm, and when it comes down to it, flooding is right up there amongst the number one killer when it comes to a natural disaster or something from a weather event. It's the flooding. What was it like when the flooding subsided around you? I myself only had the opportunity to cover a flash flood that was, again, devastating. I've never seen anything like that to this day. I don't know if I'll ever forget what it looks like. Fire is one thing. I saw fire in Tennessee, that Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, horrible fire. That was, again, a terrible scene. But there's something about what water is behind that just, take me through what you saw.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it took a long time for those waters to recede. Creeks, backyards,
all historic levels, right? As far as like the crests go.
Absolutely. Any following Florence, any little chance of rain would right away send, rivers and areas back into flood warning territory because they were just that inundated. And yeah, record flooding that has never been seen before. As a matter of fact, all of last year, Wilmington for the first time last year broke 100 inches of rain. That's never happened before in our history. And Florence was a big part of it. I think overall about 24 thereabouts inches of rain, if we're rounding up about 2 feet. It's amazing. And so when those waters recede, now you're left with debris, you're left with the mold, you're left with just structural damage, roads being washed out. As I mentioned, there was a time when Wilmington, as far as the roads go, we were cut off from the rest of the country because roads were impassable. People were trying to get back in, and we're getting messages left and right. Hey, when can we come back to Wilmington? The truth is you can't. You have to wait for the waters to recede. So getting emergency supplies in became, more and more difficult. Slowly the power started to come back, but it was just, hey, we've got to hope and pray for some dry days, some high pressure to just give us a break from this rain. But I'll tell you, if you've never been through it before, count your blessings because it is not fun.
No, not the fun is definitely not how I would describe that. Yeah. So now to put a bow on things, Gabe, going into the new hurricane season as it is nearly upon us here. I mean, when you start seeing the names getting pushed out there, at least the Atlantic hurricane names, that should kind of be the signal that, okay, June 1st is right around the corner, as it really, really is to the start of hurricane season. What have you guys learned, let alone your news team? What do you think the people in Wilmington that you've spoken to, what do you think that they have taken away from Florence? Again, a once-in-a-lifetime hurricane, or at least you hope it to be. What have they taken away from that they'll keep with them for hurricanes to potentially come?
Well, a lot of folks here in the Wilmington metro and really in southeastern North Carolina are transplants or from other parts of the country. So we do have a lot of new people that begin to come into town. And I think those people, especially those new people, realize that it only takes one storm to cause catastrophic damage. We thought that was going to be the case with Hurricane Matthew in 2016, that it was going to be that catastrophic of a storm.
It was a Category 5 in the Caribbean Basin at one point.
You're exactly right. And there were towns that were still recovering from Matthew. And then as soon as Florence hit, they're back at square one once again. Not to mention, the inland zones. But I think the big takeaway for people in our community is, you have to be diligent. You can, we keep saying, track everything on our app as most stations do, understandably so. But it really is important during hurricane season, especially if there is a threat, to keep monitoring a system like this. Now, I think we're very good at saying, okay, well, this system's not going to be a threat to us, but we are going to, watch it and everything else. But diligence, preparation. I think, especially after this year, and the fact that folks are still rebuilding at this point, almost 9 months after the storm hits, I think that's going to be the big takeaway and the big aha as we get into June 1st. And it's hard to believe it's almost here.
Yes, I would have to imagine that you guys will be fairly busy, as will we be fairly busy. Gabe, thank you so much for coming on and doing this with us. If things get nuts here into hurricane season, I'll reach back out to you again. I really hope that everything is nice and calm for you guys. You definitely deserve a quiet summer from the hurricanes this year.
We can only hope, my friend. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So for Gabe and myself and for all of us here at MyRadar, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.